Hello friends, welcome back to my channel again. Today let's see some 15 really chunky books that are worth your time. So in the previous video we saw some really good short books. I hope it helped you. This video nonetheless is for those people who want to spend much more time with a book, to get lost in that world and stay with the characters for a longer time. And I for one am super intimidated by long and chunky books, but in history has proved me wrong. Most of the chunky books that I've read have been a really good time for me, and I do want to recommend such 15 books for you so that you don't get intimidated by it. And if you're looking for a sign to pick up these kind of books, this is it. Go for it, and let's see one by one what I have in stock today. So the first book is the kind of inspiration for this entire video, because this was the most intimidating book for me in my TBR. I had it for 2 years and finally read it, and I kind of hated myself for taking so long to read it. The book is Priory of Orange Tree by Samantha Shannon. This is full of fantasy world with dragons and prophecies and a secret society that saves the world and a kind of monster that is trying to destroy the world. This is a complete package for all the fantasy lovers out there. This has intricate layers, it has LGBTQ+, it has very cute dragons, Naimutin, a dragon called Naimutin, and it is a darling, I kept telling my friend whom I did buddy reading with, I kept saying her that this is a darling dragon, I want a dragon for myself now, and all those things. It was so cute, and the story itself is very intricate. It is, it happens in different worlds, and all the linears of the story will bifurcate and then again unite together at some point, and it will all have a very good ending. I loved it overall. This is around 900 pages, and it had to be 900 pages to tell this story. I didn't feel like it was way too longer than necessary, but this was the best book that I read in a long time. And this chunkiness is, you have to read it to get to know what I'm talking about. This was a great read for me. The next book is also a fantasy, and it is technically a series, but I only read the first book and I read it last year, January. This video is also a kind of motivation for myself to pick up the next book, and I'm talking about the Dandelion Dynasty series. The first book is Grace of Kings, and it's written by Ken Liu. This is a Chinese book, I think, because all the characters, I don't know how to pronounce their names. It has multiple kingdoms like Game of Thrones, and it has one emperor who has united all the kingdoms, and now he is dead. So everyone is trying to take their share of land, and chaos is in play. It has to come into an order. There are two main characters, Kuni, Kazu, and Martha, I guess. It's been quite a long time now since I read. But those two characters, the dimensions of those relationship was really very good. I loved how detailed and detached the writer was. And I hope the next sequels of these books is going to be much more detailed with the characters. This was like watching it from an outer space, like detached from everything. You don't get to get into any character's life so deeply, but you will have a wonderful time with this book. And it is around 500 to 600 pages. It is chunky, and the next books in this series are more chunkier than the initial one. So it's going to look like a short book in front of all those books, but still this was chunky for me, and I had very, very good time with this. Already chunky books are very intimidating, and when a classic book is chunkier, it is double intimidating. But nonetheless, I forced myself to read this classic, and it was the best decision of my life. I'm talking about Crime and Punishment by Fyodor Dostoyevsky. It's the best work of Dostoyevsky. I feel it is about Raskolnikov, and he tries to commit a crime just for the sake of committing a crime and to see what happens. And the repercussions of his decision is what this book is about. You will feel like you're inside Raskolnikov's mind, and it is very, very good. The pressure, the depression, the guilt, and the emotions. It's my first Russian translated literature, so I felt very connected to the story. It motivated me to read more of Russian classic literature, and this is a very best book. It is chunkier, and look at the kind of tabs I have there. Added it to it, and I annotated this book to my heart's content, and that is how you read a classic. And it will make you get more out of the story if you annotate it, in my opinion. So I had super fun with this book, and it's chunky, but it does not feel like it's chunky. Once you start it, it will just flow like a river. I hope you will enjoy it if you pick it up. The next book is also a classic, but I am currently in the middle of, and it has more than 1,300 pages. I know it's insane, but the few pages that I have read in this book is flowing like anything. It's very fast paced. It reads like a drama, and I love the characters already. It's super easy and super accessible to read. I'm talking about The Count of Monte Cristo by Alexander Dumas. So this book follows Dante. He is kind of at the prime of his life. He's successful at his career. He loves the girl of his dreams and he gets to marry her. All these things are making someone very greedy and possessive, and he wants to destroy that for Dante. And he's been taken as a prisoner for the crime that he did not commit. So now, whatever happens happens after he comes out of the jail. I'm at the point where Dante has gone to jail now, and I'm very, very, very interested in reading it. Of course, it's very chunky and very intimidating, but I do want to be that girl who has read The Count of Monte Cristo and War and Peace. War and Peace is still in play, but I want to finish this year, hopefully this month. So speaking of Alexander Dumas, I do want to recommend another book from him. I have read this way back, years back, and still it is very fresh in my mind. I'm talking about The Three Musketeers. I hope you are all familiar with the story. It is about three musketeers who was trying to guard the French kingdom and from the cardinal, and England and France is in war, and this story is taking place in France, and these three musketeers are going to protect the kingdom, and there is a fourth musketeer who is trying to join this musketeer group, and he is in that aspiration and comes from a village to join these people. It's about that guy who's called D'Artagnan, and the other three musketeers are called Athos, Porthos, and Aramis. You will have a wonderful time with these. You should just read this book and try watching The Three Musketeers. I think 2011 version, it's the best version yet for this book, and it's really, really, really good. It's so fun, very fast-paced, very easy to read, and I loved it. And one more thing, there is one female character who has portrayed as a villain, and it's the best female villain the history has ever seen. She's such a badass, and I love her for it. She's really, really good. And if you want to know what I'm talking about, do check this book out. The next book is a kind of a very famous one. I read this during my school days, and it is about 550 pages, and I read it within the weekend, I think. And that book is Dan Brown's Angels and Demons. If you're interested in scientific mystery thriller, this book is the one you should check out. It has the Robert Langdon main character, who is a symbologist. He leads this investigation of this mystery. This talks about the CERN Large Hadron Collider. It has so much of science in it. If you're interested in science and you're nerdy like me, you will really enjoy this. And this is very fast-paced. Every chapter ends with a cliffhanger, and you will not know you're reading this chunky book, and in no time you will know that you have already finished it. You should check this out if you are a Dan Brown fan and a Robert Langdon fan, and if you are even remotely interested in science, this book will blow your mind. The next book is one of a book that is a part of a series again, but only the first book is out, and it's called the Fifth Realm series, and it's written by AA Vora, and the book is called Spin of Fate. And this is written by an Indo-Japanese author, and this story follows a girl who has. So basically in the story, the world is built with different stages of realm, higher realms and lower realms, all those things. And one can ascend from lower realm to higher realm. And one such ascension has caused the girl's mother to leave behind in the lower realm, and she has gone to the higher realm. So now she has to go into that world and rescue her mother. And there are a lot of sinistrous monsters in the lower realm, and there is kind of rivalry between gangs also, and it's really very beautifully written, and this first part was really worth something, and I am very much excited to read the second part if it ever comes. I'm super excited for it. This was a bit chunky, but it had superb fantastical elements. If you are an Indian and you want to read so much of Indian based fantasy series, this will be that. Speaking of chunky books, you cannot miss this author. She writes the most chunkiest books of all time, all the time, and she is the most celebrated fantasy writer out there, and I'm talking about Sarah J. Maas. And the one that I want to recommend you guys is from the Akator series, and it's the second book, A Coat of Mist and Fury. This is way chunkier than the rest of the books. I think the last part is much chunkier, but I haven't gotten to that part yet. But this book was really good. Apart from the smut, which I am not super into it, but the story itself was really, really good and very fast-paced. And the characters' dimensions and the relationship between two, Rysand and Farah, everything was so good, very interesting, very heart-touching. And I didn't feel like I was reading this such a big book. It was really good. And it is about Farah. I'm telling about the first book. It's about Farah, who is drawn into the land of fairies just because she killed a wolf. That wolf was in disguise and but an actual fairy. So she has to pay for it, and she has to leave her world and leave her life behind and come and live with the fairies. And that is how the story starts. But it is much more than that. A lot of intricate layers are there. A lot of interesting characters. Everything is so snarky and smutty, and it's very good. You'll have a very good time with this book. So this is the one that I'm suggesting you from the Akator series. And one more book from the same author, Sarah J. Maas, I want to suggest is the Crescent City series first part. Not the second, not the third, only the first part, because this was a complete package. It's so vivid, it's so beautiful, it's colorful. It has all the fantastical creatures you could imagine of. It has werewolves, it has vampires, it has space, it has everything you will ever think of. And the lead character is so so strong and independent, and she's so fierce. I loved the lead character, Bryce Quinlan, and I also loved Hunt Atalar, the uh, partner of Quinn. And it was so beautiful and so good. It has the best climax in a book. This is the fantastical book that you should read. If you're interested in fantasy, this book was so good. It has a lot of world building in the initial pages, and the initial 200 pages is going to little bit drain you down because of the world building. But after that, once you pass that threshold, this story was wow, just wow. I enjoyed it thoroughly, but the part 2 and part 3 were a little bit of a disappointment, but this book was really great. I see after curating this list that most of the chunky books are all fantasy. I could not help it, but nonetheless, let's roll with it. The next book is also a fantasy one, and it is V. Schwab's The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue. Addie LaRue makes a deal with the devil that she doesn't want to get married, but she wants to live longer. But the catch in that deal is that no one will ever remember her. So after centuries later, she makes the deal. She is one day is remembered by a guy, and the entire story changes from there. So this has the best atmosphere in a fantastical book, and the conversation between her and the Luke, who's the demon, was very good, and I enjoyed their conversation more than the actual story. I loved it. I love Addie LaRue as a person, and it was so good. It felt like I traveled those centuries with her. It was really good, and this chunkiness didn't matter when I read it because the story flows like something and really enjoyable. Sometimes you just read a book and you feel like, wow, I just did that. I read that book, and I can't believe that I read it. It's one of such book for me, and I have been always super intimidated by this author. And finally, when I read it, I had superb fun, and I was very happy. And that book is Brandon Sanderson's Warbreaker. This story is about two sisters. One is going to get married to a faraway kingdom's king, and he's called the God King. And in this world, there are a lot of gods, and there is a king for that god, and that god king is getting married to one of the sisters, and the other sister is trying to protect her and trying to rescue her from that fate because her kingdom and the god king's kingdom is in war. So they think that she might be in danger. And this is the very outline of the story, and it was so good. I loved the climax. I loved the characters. I there was a character called Light Song in that I would have killed to see a separate book on him. He was such an interesting character. I really hope that one day Brandon Sanderson would write a separate book about Light Song and with some love and romance and everything. He is such a great sweetheart. I loved him so much. He was very interesting. And this was, it did not feel like I was reading a very chunky book. And I read it, I think, in 3 or 4 days. It was really very good. The next one is also a book that I read last year and I loved it. It is the only Gothic book that I read, and that is The Shadow of the Wind by Carlos Ruiz Zafon, if I'm not wrong. So this story follows Daniel, and his father is having a secret society where he protects the older books. And one day he finds it out, and he has to protect one particular book entire life. And he selects one particular author's book, Julian Carax, and there is so much mystery to that life of that author, and he tries to figure out what it is. And the story was so good, so vivid, and so atmospheric. It was very fresh because this is the only Spanish translated book that I have ever read, so it was very fresh for me. I did not understand some references that they are giving to this 1950s Barcelona setup, But nonetheless, I understood and I loved the overall story. It was very good. It's a bit chunky, but it's worth your time. Trust me and read it. So the next book is also a part of a series, a very famous series which I read as a child, and it is the Harry Potter series. But in particular, I want to recommend one book from that series, which is the chunkiest of all, but it has the most important plot points ever. And I'm talking about The Order of Phoenix. And this is the chunkiest book of all in that series for a very good reason. It has the important plot points like why literally Harry is being chased by Voldemort and what is the connection between them and how is he using that to manipulate Harry and how to separate him from his friends and all those things. And it has the Dumbledore army and everything. Dumbledore does that changing into Phoenix scene is also there. If you know what Harry Potter is and if you know what this book is about, you know what I'm talking about. This has the most action-packed sequences in the entire book, and I love it for it. This is the most favorite part of the series for me. I love Order of Phoenix more than Deathly Hallows or more than Philosopher's Stone. I love Order of Phoenix. If you are interested in reading Harry Potter and you're intimidated by this size, please don't be. It is the wonderful book. The next book is, I think, the only book that is going to be intimidating while you're reading it, despite the size, because it's the non-fiction book that's called Sapiens by Yuval Noah Harari. This book is really chunky and it is really going to test your patience and time. It's a little bit tricky to read in the beginning, but if you read it, it's going to be the best book that you ever read. It is like looking past of our history without any judgment and without any prejudgmental mind. If at all some alien was watching our history and it was just looking at all the happenings, and if it wrote a book, this would be like it. I feel like the author has done such a great perspective to the history. I loved reading every chapter and it was eye-opening. I was reading it like a thriller book rather than a non-fiction book. So I highly, highly, highly recommend you to check this out, despite the size, despite the toughness of the language. It was originally written in Hebrew and then later translated to English. So it's going to have its issues, but it is really an accessible if you try it, and it is going to be very, very knowledge providing book, I hope. And I love this book. I constantly think about the concepts of this book, and I cannot recommend this enough. So we have come to the end of this video, and this is the last book that I want to talk to you about. And this entire chunky book series will not be complete without these books. And this author is known for writing chunkier books. And I'm talking about George R.R. Martin, and this is the one of the book in the Song of Ice and Fire or the Game of Thrones series. This is the second book, Clash of Kings, and this is chunkiest one is actually the Feast of Crows, but this is also much more chunkier. But I love the second part more than anything else in that series because it has so many happenings. I have annotated this like anything, and it has so many characters who have died. This was an eventful book in a series, so I enjoyed it so much. This is again like Race of Kings has a lot of smaller kingdoms, and one is trying to accumulate everything together and just rule and be the king, and they just want to accumulate all the smaller kingdoms and rule, and the ruling king is from King's Landing. And the characters are wonderful. You'll have so much of multi-layered characters in it. There is no gray, there is no white or black in the characterization. Everyone is gray, and you will root for everyone. My favorite house is the Stark, and like I said, there are a lot of small kingdoms, and each kingdom is called house. And the heroes of this story comes from the house Stark, and they are the noblest ones. I loved it. And if you have only watched the series, you should try the books. Books are great, and the second book is really something. So that is pretty much it, guys. These are all the chunkiest books that I have read so far, and I have recommended you all the best ones. And I hope you will love it. I hope you will give it a go. I hope this gives you the tinge of motivation that you need to read these chunky books. And as always, I would like you to recommend me more of chunky books that you think I might like. Leave all those things in the comments. I would love to read. I would love to chat with you guys. And that is about it. Until I see you again in a very next video with a bookish content, this is Sushmita signing off. Keep reading. Bye-bye.